Let's go to Israel now and catch up again with Gerald Steinberg, who's the Professor of Politics at Bar Illan University. Thanks for joining us again, Gerald. The news that might not be big news in Israel as yet, but it's certainly dominant here. It seems very clear that our Labor government is about to join with the French and the UK and others and recognise Palestine as a state next month at the UN General Assembly. What difference will that make when it comes to the peace process and the path forward?
It will make almost no difference. You know, Emmanuel Macron in France has almost no government. He's in very deep political problems there, deep political crisis. So he's looking for attention. He's looking for something international. Israel, the Middle East is always a good one to do. So that helps him politically. And then you have this mass hysteria. You have Keir Starmer in the UK. You have the Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney, and now you have Albanese in Australia and others joining this bandwagon. And it's quite clear that none of them have any idea what they're doing. They're recognizing a non-existent Palestinian state, a state which is sort of run by a corrupt organization called the Palestinian Authority, which is really the PLO and the Fatah organization, a Fatah militia that was thrown out of Gaza by Hamas. These are all tribal conflicts, tribal not in the sense of necessarily ethnic tribes, but tribal in the sense of within the Palestinian society, different organizations, and they're not interested in running a government. If they were, they would have already been able to have an agreement with Israel. So all of these international leaders are just putting forth slogans to be able to say to their constituencies, to get headlines in the media, we're doing something. But in fact, what they're really doing is adding to the chaos that already exists.
I want to show you something that our Foreign Minister Penny Wong said yesterday. My analysis of this was that it was the sort of thing we would expect to hear from a radical activist rather than a foreign minister, and it was intent on demonising Israel. Have a listen.
Everybody understands that there is a risk there will be no Palestine left to recognise unless the international community work together towards two states.
Gerald, there'll be no Palestine left if this doesn't happen.
These are slogans that many political leaders around the world are now adopting, and it really shows a very shallow understanding of the history of the reality. There are 4 or 5 million Palestinians, people who identify themselves as Palestinian Arabs. And it's important to understand that the term Palestine came about roughly 2,000 years ago when the Romans used that term in order to destroy or to erase the history of the Jewish people. And then it was basically rekindled by the British back in around 1917 during the Mandate period, when these were all foreign occupiers. These Palestinian Arabs, there were Palestinian Jews and Palestinian Arabs at the time. And now the world has this concept of Palestinians, of a Palestine that never existed as an independent Arab state of any kind. And they themselves don't want an independent state. What majority of Palestinians, certainly the political leaders, whether it's Hamas or whether it's Mahmoud Abbas from the PLO and from the Fatah organization, what they want to do is see the end of Israel.
Yep.
And that has been the goal since 1947. And when you have people like Penny Wong, who clearly has no depth or understanding of the history and no real interest in all the millions of people who live in this area, so she repeats these lines which are fed to her, that are echoed among many other political leaders with very similar shallow understanding, and it leads us to absolutely nowhere. It's not going to make any difference to Israelis, to Israeli government policy, still fighting a very bitter terror war. We have to remove Hamas's ability not just to have another October 7th massacre and atrocities that were so horrible, they're still firing rockets at Israel because they line Gaza, and that's the important thing to understand, the reality. Gaza still has kilometers filled with terror tunnels where hostages are being kept, where terrorists live and eat well, and where there are still hundreds, if not thousands, of rockets. And as soon as there's a ceasefire, those rockets will be aimed at Israel, because we've seen this over and over again for the last 20 years.
And
that's what people like Penny Wong and your Prime Minister need to understand, and forget all those slogans that they're fed by whether it's the Foreign Office or whether it's from international sources in the media.
They choose to remain ignorant, sadly. Thanks so much for joining us, Gerald. I appreciate it. We'll keep in touch. Gerald Steinberg there.